podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
On a glorious sunny Saturday afternoon at Old Trafford and in a rare 3pm kickoff, Manchester United delivered with 18-year-old Alejandro Garnacho sealing a deserved victory in a must-win game as the Reds close in on that top 4 spot in the Premier League and therefore Champions League qualification. 3 games are left away at Bournemouth and at home to West London duo Fulham and Chelsea. 2 more victories will secure it. If those games are as comfortable as Saturday, that will certainly do. Wolves didn't have a single shot on target. United had 9 and should have scored plenty more. Erik aptly reviewing after, again, we make the goalie of the opposition the man of the match. Down at Wembley on Sunday, things were not so rosy. A world record crowd watched Manchester United women's first FA Cup final, but the Reds couldn't convert a dominant, expectation-shattering first half display into an advantage, and instead it was relentless winners Chelsea who were clinical and won it 1-0 with Sam Kerr scoring in a 3rd consecutive FA Cup final for the Blues. When the tears dry a little, attention will turn to the WSL title race between the same 2 sides. A very warm welcome to the Manchester United Weekly Podcast. There's so much to talk about this week. I'm Harry Robinson and Jack Tate is alongside me as always. Thank you for joining us. We'll be talking the Women's FA Cup final first, then get stuck into the men's victory over Wolves. We'll review the end of the academy season with the 21s and the 18s, a serious highlight for one of our loanees, or 2 in fact, and there's loads more, so let's get started quickly. Jack, we're recording just as I'm just looking at my screen to the left of me because Chelsea are about to lift the FA Cup after an entertaining FA Cup final, but one in which Chelsea didn't play their best but still came out on top. United did very well in the first half, but we didn't finish our chances, and it's they'll be really, I've said they'll be really gutted. I can see they're really gutted because United's players are looking on with tears in their eyes, and it's not just the players, it's the coaches as well, because they should have won that game.
Yeah, I think watching this game, it was a reminder of both how far this United team have come this season and also how far is still left to go.
Yeah.
I remember playing Chelsea earlier in the season and we were talking on the podcast about how, it's just a level too far. It's an ask too far to think that we can beat Chelsea. And now at the end of the season, Chelsea are the only team standing in the way of us winning the WSL and the FA Cup. And in that first half, really took the game to Chelsea and really were quite dominant for most of that first half. Leah Galton offside, had an early goal ruled out.
Yeah. Plenty
of other opportunities in the first half where United could and should have done better. Even at the start of the second half, got into some good positions and for whatever reason, a lot of seemed very shy to kind of take the shot on. But again, it's a reminder of how far this team has come throughout the season to be almost at the level of a team like Chelsea, but still there is a lot more to do and more to learn just in terms of how to get over the line in these big games. And Chelsea in the women's game is the absolute prime example of that.
Yeah, just relentless force, aren't they? Their record at Wembley is ridiculous. And yeah, you're right. It was almost as if we had that belief that we were as good as Chelsea for the first half an hour, 35 minutes or so. And then when we didn't get that goal, which we should kind of deserve really, then it started to fall off. And in the second half, it looked a bit more like we started respecting even in probably the last 15 or 20 minutes of the first half, we were so clearly the better side, but that it felt like there was still that worry in the back of our heads of, we're playing Chelsea, we need to be careful here. And maybe that just holding back just a touch stopped United from going into halftime with a lead, as well as a very tight offside call just 30 seconds into the game. Ella Toon was offside and then Galton finished, and then some very close chances as well. But we had Chelsea rattled, so it's a great shame. And the second half was different. Chelsea brought on Pernilla Harder, who changed the game really. It was Sam Kerr who scored, but Pernilla Harder changed it and found some great space, and Chelsea just stepped up, and they still weren't at their best, but the truth is you have to be ruthless and perfect to beat Chelsea, and we had a great first half but not perfect, and the second half we really fell off, and it is mad that we still haven't managed to beat them. They are just, that first victory over Chelsea will mean so much to these players.
Yeah, and I think it really does come down to just that know-how of winning. I think even, like you said, even the start of the second half, United were, I think, quite clearly still the better team, but Pernilla Harder coming on changed Chelsea's formation a little bit. Sam Kerr started picking up some good spaces down the left, and Ona Battier was struggling to contain that a little bit. I think you could also see United tire a lot more than Chelsea, which was probably partially just because of the way the game was going, the sort of the state of the game in the second half. But I think this is still a big deal for United to be in this FA Cup final and to have got this far, but there will be understandable, massive disappointment at the fact that we didn't turn what was a good and very good in parts first half performance into any actual, score sheet superiority, because that game was there for the taking. It's all, Chelsea obviously have this sort of almost aura about them, similar to Real Madrid in the Champions League, that, you feel like you're never quite going to win, even when you're maybe 1 or 2-0 up. But I think the frustration for United was that we never really put Chelsea in a position where they had to come out and prove that they were still that team. Yeah. We put them under pressure, but, you go 1-0 down, maybe 2-0 down if we can put a couple of those chances away in the first half. And then you're asking Chelsea all sorts of questions that, and, if they come up and they come back and answer those, then fair enough. But I think from United's point of view, it's that we did a lot of good work, but it was just never finished off in the way that it needed to be.
It's always frustrating, isn't it, when you let the opposition win without them having to play their best. That's when it really grates. But I think there'll be a lot of pride in United's performance because that first half was so out the block so quickly and so impressively. But
I think the second half of this season in general has been massive for taking that next step for this United team. We said that we've come a long way, but there's still a long way to go. And I think starting to get to that second part, sort of getting to a team that knows how to win in big games, you have started to see some of that in the second half of this season from United. The first half of the season we were in good form, won a lot of games, but everyone was sort of saying, well, Man City will catch up, Arsenal will catch up, Chelsea will catch up. And I think you've seen a string of big wins over the second half of the season where the belief has really come into this United team. In one-off games, there's probably still another level that needs to go. But I think even if United end this season, not winning the FA Cup, which you obviously haven't, and finishing second in the WSL, I think there is a lot to be taken out of this season for how this team can believe in themselves moving forward.
So much, yeah. Do you want to know a ridiculous stat?
Of course.
United have only lost this season to Chelsea. It's ridiculous. We are unbeaten against every team in all competitions except Chelsea, which is incredible.
That is a ridiculous stat.
Because we went out of the League Cup in the group stage, so we didn't actually have to lose. We lost a game on penalties, but that doesn't really in a group stage. I don't think that really counts because it's for bonus points. So yeah, it's a crazy stat, and it's a stat that means it would kind of be appropriate if we were to lose out on the double to Chelsea, because that we are at the moment the second best team in the country. There's 2 games left for United. We play City next Sunday at 6:45 at home at Leeds Sports Village, and then Liverpool away to end the season. Chelsea have 3 games to play and are 1 point behind with exactly the same goal difference. So it's going to be very, very tense. Chelsea play this midweek against West Ham away, so they've got another game straight after the cup final. Then they have Arsenal at home and then Reading away. They'll beat West Ham and Reading. It's whether Arsenal can do us a favour, but we'll see. They've got to have to use it as motivation, aren't they? It's that tricky thing where they have to use it as motivation, but the problem is it's still not in our hands, and Chelsea now have the perfect motivation to go and win the double. Final thing I'll say on the Women's FA Cup final, it was interesting to see Avram Glazer in attendance from the family who shut down the women's team in 2005 because it was deemed unessential to the club and to business, and then I'm pretty sure has never attended a United women game since they were reformed in 2018, and suddenly rocks up to their first final after complaints over the last few years. Things are in a pretty good scenario now, but complaints under Casey Stoney that the investment was lip service, I think would be the summary of Casey Stoney's complaints in regards to certain things like training ground facilities and attention and investment. So yeah, the cheek of him to turn up to his first United women's game at Wembley. Particularly, there was an interesting snippet of information in United We Stand's gutter snipe recently that it cost the club £250,000 for Avram Glazer to attend the League Cup final, the Men's League Cup final. So I wonder what the cost was to attend this Women's FA Cup final as well, charged to the club after all that. So yeah, a negative note to end on. But overall, a world record crowd for a domestic women's football game, 77,000, a brilliant atmosphere. I tell you what, I'm very happy for, even though the day hasn't ended in the way that it would have done. We're speaking as United fans who have a fairly significant interest in the women's team, but it's not comparable to our interest in the men's teams. But there are lots of United women supporters who are United women supporters, not just United fans, and I'm delighted for those who have been going for the last 5 years to be able to go to Wembley. It must be very satisfying and a great day out. So very happy for them. So we move on to the men's team. What were your thoughts?
A much needed win, massive, and I think overall a pretty good performance. I think you could see that we probably benefited a little bit from a first full week off in about 3 months. I think there was some standout performances, the same issues that we've seen over the last month, just to complete talking about being unable to make superiority count. For the women in the FA Cup final, it's exactly the same for the men against Wolves, and I think it has been that way for
the United
quite a while
DNA
now.
is these days.
Yeah. And then Ten Hag was asked by Stuart Gardner after the game or mentioned that United never do it the easy way. And I think Ten Hag is probably as frustrated as all of us are. But ultimately, I think some good performances. Wolves offered very little and we contained what little they did offer. And ultimately, it's a massive 3 points to get us back on track.
Yeah, it's a crucial victory. It felt like in our first midweek off since the World Cup, there was kind of a hole to fill, and United fans, certainly online, kind of went mad to fill it.
I saw a great tweet through the week that said, if you're a Man United player, your one and only goal should be not to be the subject of criticism when United go into any kind of break.
Yeah.
And De Gea was certainly that this week.
Yeah.
And if you get it before an international break, then you're in an even worse position.
Yeah. Well, we've got another midweek off now, but I don't think we'll have quite the same hysteria. I think there's certainly some justified hysteria to be had around United in terms of the ownership. But when it starts going on to certain players and it's just this kind of endless run of debate, it's like, come on, enjoy your midweek off. We've got a rare chance to do something else with our lives for this middle of the week. But yeah, it's a massive 3 points given the two games before the defeats to Brighton and West Ham. I should say we didn't record last week and I meant to give some clarity about this on Twitter and to our patrons, but it was my final week of university. So having spent my final week before submitting my dissertation following United in Seville, I kind of had to actually turn it on for the final week of uni. So didn't quite have time to record and put an episode out. But yeah, we should mention those games. They were terrible. And very familiar issues. So this victory was even more important. I think any kind of drop points at home to Wolves, and you really would have felt it was. I mean, it would have been in Liverpool's hands, kind of, but you really would have felt that they were favourites to get it ahead of us. Do you think the break mentally as well after those two games in the second half? I thought it still wasn't great, but we looked a bit better than we have in many second halves. Or was that more down to Wolves being pretty rubbish?
I think mentally more than physically, it seemed to help. I mean, I've said this a lot over the last month or so, and it was the same at West Ham and even at Brighton. I didn't feel like United were absolutely out on their feet at the end of those games. I just don't think we played well. I think those are, maybe the tiredness is affecting, again, mentally sort of decision making and how focused we can stay at the end of games. But I don't feel like this is a team that's absolutely running out of steam physically. I think it's mentally more than anything that it's really taking its toll this long season. And I think at Wolves, it felt like we approached the game with a little bit of a clearer head. I thought some of our play in the first half was really, really good. Just a lot more control over the game, which, to be fair, has been a theme at home versus away all season. So it wasn't a huge shock. I think in terms of top four, coming out of first Brighton and then especially after West Ham, at this point in the season, in my head, I've all but written off getting any more points away from home. And anything that we can get from Bournemouth next week is a sort of a bonus in my head. I think it's always been win the 3 home games, you're in the top 4, no matter what anyone else does.
Yep.
And that, to me, is still the mindset. If we can go and win at Bournemouth next week, great, that's a 3-point bonus. But I think in the way that I'm sort of thinking about things now is let's beat Chelsea and Fulham at home, which we've been excellent all season, and top 4 is sewn up.
Yeah. And our home form is incredible. 42 out of 66 points from games at Old Trafford this season. I think it's now 6 league home clean sheets on the bounce, which is our best record for a few years. There's all sorts of these stats. And the truth is, as the seasons get older, you can kind of tell the difference because you're just excited to go watch United at home every week without fail, because we basically always win at home with a couple of exceptions, and compare that to recent seasons. And it just, I almost wonder whether the mental side of it, there seems such confidence from the team at home, and Eriksen said something along these lines that the team are just so confident because we've got 2 home games left that we can get top 4. They're so confident because they think we'll win those 2 home games. I wonder if the amount of confidence we have at home from our record this season almost exacerbates the away problem, where
100%.
confidence seems a real problem.
Because you start to believe it yourself, like this, our away form hasn't been great all season, right?
Yeah.
But really it started to become more talked about publicly really after sort of the Arsenal game and then really after the Liverpool game. Before then it was sort of, we're a bit worse away, kind of as you'd expect, but home form has been quite good. And really it's been since the Liverpool game that we've started to put in, because until then, our record against the bottom half away from home was fine. We'd lost against all of the other sort of big 6 that we played away from home. We drew with Chelsea, lost at Villa, obviously. But those are games you sort of feel like, well, you can lose those sometimes. We beat all those teams at home. And it feels really like the last couple of months since the Liverpool game is when it started to become a much bigger issue. Then you go and lose at Newcastle, you lose at Brighton, you lose at West Ham. And then the more that you sort of buy into this confidence at home, the more when you play away from home, you buy into the fact that you're not as good away from home as well. And so I do think that there is definitely some amount of United sort of making that issue worse than it already is by the way that we are so confident at home. It's something that needs to be sorted out before next season. We're fortunate that our home form and our form from sort of January to the end of March put us in a position where we can rely basically on just our home form to get us over the line to get top 4. Because if you think back to that period where we went unbeaten for so long, if a couple of those results had gone different ways, we'd really be struggling now and relying on picking up points away from home, which thankfully we don't have to do at this point.
Yeah. It's a question one of our patrons asked. Ethan says it's probably an impossible question, but what do you think our terrible away form is down to? And he cites the fact that it seems clear we can't handle high pressure situations very well. I think there's so much to it. We've just spoken about one point, kind of the mental aspect going into the game and the overall big picture mentality. I think the other problem is a wider United thing of failing to score goals and kill games off. And at home, you retain, I think at home, we more often score in the first half. I need to check that. But from memory, I think we more often than in away games score in the first half. And I'll check that at a later date. And then you also retain that home support going into the final few minutes, whereas contrastingly, if you're away from home, the longer you don't score, the more the home crowd get up. And then, I think there absolutely is something to be said about this United team's ability to withstand that kind of pressure, particularly now we're missing Martinez as kind of who has been one of the key to changing the mentality. I think it's been Martinez, Casemiro and Antony have been the 3 keys to really change the mentality of this United team so that we could go to Barcelona and get a great result, so that we could have those home wins against Liverpool, City and Arsenal and many other moments throughout the season. I think there is something to be said about the mental side of things, but I think that will change with as the kind of profile of the squad changes, as Ten Hag brings in more players like Martinez, Antony and Casemiro who have that kind of grit and determination about them that doesn't waver under pressure, unlike some other players in the team. But I think really so much of the way United play is kind of reliant on scoring first, because you score first and then you slowly break them down and get that second goal. Saturday wasn't a perfect example of that because it actually took us until the 94th minute and we kind of fell off from that dominance in the second half. It wasn't constant, so it's not the best example of it, but that is kind of how the games where it's felt comfortable and it feels like it's gone exactly how Ten Hag's wanted them to is when we score in the first half and end up winning 2-0. That kind of feels like Ten Hag's United style at the moment. And away from home, our scoring just isn't good enough and we're not scoring the first goal. And we're not taking chances. And as soon as it gets to half-time and you haven't taken your chances, we don't seem able to go out and put in the same second half performance. And I don't think that's just down to fatigue, physical or mental. I think that's also, it's all these problems feeding into one.
Yeah, I think my best guess at why the away form is so bad is sort of two-pronged. The first is, as you mentioned, the mental side of things. It is, all things being equal, it is just harder to play when you have 50,000 people actively supporting the other team, heckling you, telling you that everything you're doing is terrible, than it is when you have 50,000 people on your side. And I think a big difference this year compared to last couple of years is that the crowd at Old Trafford is firmly on the team side. Whereas you go back to last year, every game was edgy. Yeah. And that was the team's fault. That's not the crowd's fault, because the team had put themselves in a position where after 20 minutes, if this was a bad performance, the crowd were rightly going to get on the players' backs because the season had been so bad. That doesn't happen now at Old Trafford. But then I think what the problem for United is, it is always more difficult mentally to play away from home. Fine. I think the problem for United, though, is that they're not good technically and tactically to be able to overcome the fact that it is then harder to play away from home. You look at all of our bad results away from home this season. They aren't coming from either, a mistake from one of our players, West Ham aside. Normally, they are the result of a long, sustained period where pressure has been built up and built up and built up from both the fans and the players. You go to Brighton, the entire second half, we barely got out of our own half. Same thing with Liverpool in the second half. Same thing at Newcastle, pretty much the entire game. Even going all the way back to Crystal Palace, where fine, we ended up drawing because of a brilliant free kick from Elise, but that entire second half, after really dominating the first half, we were terrible.
Spurs as well.
Spurs, it's exactly the same. Same thing at Arsenal as well. Sure, we conceded the last minute goal, but that goal had been coming for 20 minutes before, And so I think the thing for United is, yes, the game gets hard. When teams get momentum against you away from home, it's tough because the players have the tails up, the crowd has their tails up. Everything that you do gets 10, 15% harder. And I don't think that United have any sort of cushion or margin for error yet in how good our players are technically and how comfortable we are with the system that we want to play to be able to overcome those difficult moments. We aren't good enough, because what we've talked about this before, what you need when things start going against you, especially playing away from home, you need to keep the ball for a minute, 90 seconds. You don't even have to go anywhere. Even if the ball is just kept between the defence for a minute, that's fine, because it takes the sting out of the game. And I think that's what United haven't done enough of this season. We haven't been able to take the sting out of games, especially when we're playing away from home. And I personally think a big reason for that is because we're not good enough to keep the ball under any amount of pressure. And when teams have their tails up,
isn't part of that. The there are some subtle kind of contributing factors to that, like the fact that Eriksen fades in games massively and then comes off 100%. Around the 60-minute mark, and he's our best player at maintaining possession and kind of dictating the tempo, because that's his role in midfield. The absence of a backup to him, or him being able to last the full 90 minutes at his peak quality, is a key factor in that. And I think there's a lot of these little things contributing together. And
similar in other positions as well, where, you go away from home, you're going to be under a little bit more pressure. You think, okay, let's go a little bit more defensive. Maybe you play Fred in midfield, or maybe you play Wan-Bissaka over Dalot. The problem is that when United go a little bit more defensive, it makes that issue of being able to keep the ball even worse. And same with even our wingers they're not really ball retention wingers.
No, not
really.
No.
Anthony gives the ball away quite a lot. Sancho should be a bit better at keeping the ball, but hasn't been. Just been in bad form.
Yeah.
Even Bruno Fernandes and Casemiro, two of the players that really set the tone for this team, keeping the ball is not their strength.
Yeah, and it's no surprise that this kind of increased frequency of bad away performances is coinciding with Casemiro's level dropping off a little bit.
Yeah.
And the solidity of Casemiro and Eriksen together seems to have dropped off a little bit. That's probably a conversation for another time, because I don't know what the reason for that is yet.
The worst results, we were bad against the top half even before he got injured, but bad results against the bottom half teams as well coincide with Martinez getting injured too.
Yeah,
who is
I think
by
that's
far
a massive...
away our best player at keeping the ball when we have it in defence.
Yeah, he's brilliant at that, and he also protects De Gea massively. And again, it's no surprise that De Gea's bad form is coinciding with Martinez being ruled out, because there's been concerns about De Gea all season, but things have got particularly bad since Martinez got injured in the second half against Sevilla, and then you had the horrendous performance away at Sevilla and several others, including that save against West Ham, which is less kind of down to Martinez, but there was some poor defending in the build-up to that De Gea mistake against West Ham to allow Benrahma to score. Yeah. I found it interesting that, this is going back a minute or two, but Ten Hag said after the Wolves game that all the subs made a good impact, and that's been the problem in the last few weeks, that the subs were bad, which is very true. We've had a few conversations on here where we've said, like, I can't remember which game it was, maybe it was Spurs, where Fred, Malacia and Martial came on and were just abysmal in their contributions.
Yeah.
And that was true against Wolves. It was much better. So I think there's so much going on. Going back to the Wolves game, because we've detoured a little bit, but we had so many shots against them. We created 4 massive chances. We should have scored more. It's very hard to explain, isn't it? And Shaw spoke about it after the Brighton game and said, he held his hands up and said it was my mistake for the handball and the penalty, but we should have scored in the first half.
Held his hand up. Nice.
Yeah, not deliberate, but he was right that we should have scored more. And we said, I think we said this when we lost away at Sevilla, that was just an atrocious kind of few goals to concede, but it shouldn't have got to that situation. We should have scored more in the first leg. We should have scored and at least threatened in the second leg, and we didn't. And it's kind of United's key problem. And I think it's not just the players. It would be great to have a great number 9, but it's also a massive problem for Ten Hag to sort out. These are kind of his 2 big problems, aren't they? To prove himself, can he get United to be more clinical, because we're massively underperforming in terms of the number of chances we're creating, and can he get United to be better in second halves and better mentally away? And that's his massive thing to work on over the summer, whether it's by improving the base level of like the technical quality in the squad or the mentality of the players, or can he make United better than the sum of their parts?
Yeah, I think it's easy when you get an issue like this. I think it's easy to just say, well, it's because United don't have a good number 9. And quite clearly that is true. We very clearly need a better option than either Martial or Weghorst. Rashford has had to play up there a lot this season. But the thing is, even in an ideal scenario, even if you put Erling Haaland in this team, not every single chance is going to fall to the number 9. And
he wouldn't be scoring 52 goals in this United team, would he?
No, exactly. And so, yes, it is about getting a good striker in, and that will certainly help some of these issues. But it's not just them. Like Antony, we think, is going to be a long-term player in this team. Missed 2 great chances yesterday. Martial has missed chances all season. Sancho missed a couple of good chances yesterday. Bruno Fernandes hasn't been as clinical as he normally is. It's not just all about putting a world-class number 9 in there and then thinking that everything's going to be solved. There's a lot more that I think still needs to be done, whether that is just about confidence in front of goal. And, stats tell you that if you have a season where you perform massively below your expected goals, you're probably going to regress somewhere towards the mean the next season. And maybe that'll be the case for United, but I think Ten Hag needs to figure out whether this is a more sort of underlying problem in this team. And if it is, how do we go about solving that? Because this has been a massive issue for a very long time now. Rashford's great form sort of masked this, but when Rashford's form has dipped over the last 6 weeks or so, we have really, really struggled to score goals. And we haven't struggled to create chances. Bruno Fernandes has created the most chances in the league this season. Our expected goals are pretty good. I think we're 5th or 6th, which, you want it to be a bit higher, but I think the one that really stands out is I think United have created the 3rd most big chances in the league.
Yeah, that's true.
So, it's not as if we're not creating the chances. We aren't putting them away clinically enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about some more positive things. Garnacho, brilliant. It was, for a reception like that for an 18-year-old coming back from injury was incredible. It was a real testament to how exciting a player he is. First appearance since the 12th of March, and he only needed 15 minutes or so, as his little brother was tweeting, to score again. And it was a real moment of quality and composure and good decision making from him, which is where Ten Hag wants him to improve on decision making, both in defence and attack. This was excellent. That kind of composure to cut in and then go for the shot quickly and catch the keeper out, and it just a perfect finish off the inside of the post. It was great. Yeah,
what a reception, and actually made a massive impact coming off the bench. I was surprised He didn't come off the bench against West Ham, and I can only assume that's because he wasn't fully fit, even though he was on the bench. I mean, he just offers, especially with Rashford out at the moment, he offers us a completely different dimension to Sancho or Antony or even Martial if he was to play out there. You know, he's so direct in his running. He gives defenders headaches, and he's far from the finished article. You know, 2 minutes before the goal, he had a great chance running down the left side up against Totti. Bruno made a great run on his outside, and he plays it too far, and it goes out of play for a goal kick. You know, there are definitely areas for him to improve, but his understanding of space and how to utilize space, I think, is exceptional for someone his age. And it reminds me actually of a trait that Rashford had when he came into the team, and that has always been Rashford's probably best skill until this season, when his finishing has improved so much. So there is a massive future ahead of Garnacho. Ten Hag sort of challenged him after the game to saying that, you know, really the next step is find a way to be in this team as a regular starter every week. That will be hard with Rashford being pretty much nailed on as starting on the left side. But I think as a United fan, what you want to see really is, you know, 4 or 5 options as for those 2 winger spots. And I think with Ahmad coming back, Garnacho coming through, we're starting to get towards that now. And I think every one of those players offers something a little bit different, which will enable United to play different ways against different opposition when it's required.
Yeah, absolutely. Bruno Fernandes was great. The pass for the goal and all of his work before Martial's opening goal. And then the pass to Antony was excellent. He
really does seem to shine when United are not playing at their best, doesn't he, Fernandes? Yeah. Which I think is probably partially down to his playing style, but it's felt almost a little bit reminiscent of 2020, 2021 in recent weeks, where he's just dragging us through games, or trying to at least, and maybe it's not always working, but it's just something about him when United don't look quite at it.
There was I saw a clip of, you probably remember the chance where the ball was loose and he kind of hooks it over his shoulder to Shaw's running on the left side of the box.
Yeah, I was watching that on TV. I cannot understand how he saw that run.
Because he looks over his shoulder a few seconds before, but it has to be so quick because the ball's about to come to him that he doesn't even get to look round properly. And yet his peripheral vision must just be incredible, because he spots that run just out of nowhere. And it didn't come to anything, did it? But it's just the vision and kind of bravery to do that again and again. And we've criticised him sometimes for doing it too much, but in most scenarios, he's great at it. Some player. Antony, who got the assist, but had some very high profile misses. I think there's so much good faith towards Antony at the moment, because people can see that he is going to be a great United player.
I've been quite critical of Antony throughout the season. I wrote an article saying how far he still has to go, but actually I've been really impressed with him in the last few months. I think he's really stepped things up. He's added a little bit more variety to his game. His involvement has gone up a lot. I thought there were times earlier in the season where he'd sort of go missing for 15, 20 minutes at a time. That hasn't really happened at all. And I think one of the things that he brings to this team is an absolute belief and an absolute willingness to get on the ball and make things happen, no matter the situation of the game. And I think sometimes that is a trait that United have lacked in recent years. Look, he's still got a lot to improve on massively. His decision making can still become a lot better. One of his misses, I thought he should have played it to Martial for the first one, where he puts it just wide, sort of atones for that for the goal. But I've been really impressed with him, and I think you've got to give him a lot of credit for how he's improved throughout the season. Because you go back to, I know he scored in his first 3 Premier League games, but his general play, he was very limited back then, and it's been anything but that recently.
Yeah, absolutely. We should move on. Is there anyone else? I thought Wan-Bissaka was great and Shaw was great, and that's becoming pretty regular. Certainly at home, it's becoming pretty regular, isn't it?
Shaw is becoming, I mean, Wan-Bissaka too, to be fair. He's just obviously plays a little bit less than Shaw. But Shaw in particular is just becoming an absolute, he's just so reliable. And that is a trait that I think United have lacked. Every great team needs players that are going to come in and you can guarantee every single week they're not going to perform worse than a 6.5, 7 out of 10. And that's Shaw every single week at the moment.
Absolutely. I think it kind of said a lot how no one was kind of criticising him after the mistake against Brighton, because he's been so reliable, and it was somewhat unfortunate. And there was some controversy in the build up to that as well, that gutting ending. Let's go. We're going to talk about Ahmad after our Patreon Q&A, in which we're going to talk about what would happen if we didn't finish in the top four, Harry Kane, Michael Carrick and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's comments and his return to Old Trafford, which was lovely, and his comments on the Glazer ownership and a few other bits. And then we'll talk about the end to the 21s and under 18 season and Ahmad. So let's go into our Patreon Q&A. Okay, let's start by talking about Ahmad, Jack. Another brilliant goal. Just, it continues for him, doesn't it?
It's becoming almost a weekend ritual at this point that we get a brilliant Ahmad goal for Sunderland. I mean, yeah, for anyone that hasn't already seen it, Sunderland 1-0 down against Luton in the playoff semi-final at the Stadium of Light, and Ahmad scored a wondrous free kick from the right edge of the penalty area. It was another very good performance all round as well. I mean, he is so loved at Sunderland. You sort of try not to get ahead of yourself because you've seen your United loanees do well in the past, but I think certainly in the time that we've been doing this podcast, I think he is having the most successful loan spell that we've seen. Certainly among young players, like Chris Smalling did well on loan in Italy, but certainly among young players who you would expect to have a future at United, I think this is the best one we've seen. Yeah,
with the caveat that he cost a huge amount of money and he's not an academy graduate.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, it was a ridiculous goal. He's doing so well. He's going to leave Sunderland an absolute hero, possibly a huge hero if they actually get promoted, which would have been so unexpected at the start of the year. And now it's about Ten Hag seem to suggest that he'll be coming back into United squad next year. And I think 3 months ago, there were still some doubts whether that would be definitely the right thing to do. I think at this point, you think, yeah, absolutely. He can be giving Anthony some competition on the right wing. I think it's worth, for those who haven't watched him at Sunderland, it's worth pointing out that he's not like a traditional winger. He's a lot more like Sancho than you might think. He's a bit quicker and more decisive than Sancho at the moment. I think that's mainly confidence, but also there's a bit more space in the Championship. But in terms of how they cut inside and keep the ball and play in tight spaces and play those like nice reverse passes and the great footwork, they're quite similar. And that could be pretty good to have on the right wing. But he's also another one of he's kind of in the same way that Sancho is. He's one of those wingers who you could easily see playing at number 10, and he has played there for Sunderland. That kind of sums up what kind of a winger he is. But he looks great. It's such a big step up, but he's earned the chance, absolutely. And I'm really excited to see what he can do.
I think you think as well would actually fit in really nicely alongside Anthony as another option on the right. You know, I think then, do you think you've got Rashford and Garnacho on the left? Maybe you think of Sancho mainly as a Bruno Fernandes replacement at number 10, who could also play on the left if needed, or maybe when Rashford goes up front occasionally. Then got Anthony and Ahmad on the right. You know, that starts to look like a really good set of wingers with quite a lot of depth in there too. And you know, Ahmad and Anthony are probably are relatively similar, but I think Ahmad gives you something a little bit different to what Anthony gets you. I think a little bit more variety in his play. You know, Rashford and Garnacho, again, are similar, but I think have different qualities. You know, there's a lot of variety in that group.
Yeah.
I'd expect Ahmad to come back next season and probably start 20 games across the year. And I think that's fine.
And if he does, that's great. This goes back to how important it is to sign the right number 9, which we're just talking about in our Patreon Q&A. If you get the right number 9, suddenly those options on the wing, you think, wow, that's 5 great wingers. Sancho, we need to see.
All of whom are under 25 as well.
It's exciting. And they'll push each other on. The other main positive loanee news was Alvaro Fernandes, wasn't it? Yeah,
he won Alvaro Fernandes after winning United's Young Player of the Season last year.
Yeah.
He then went and won Preston's Young Player of the Season award after his loan spell this year. Preston lost out on the playoffs on the final day. They weren't really in contention by that point. But Fernandes had another good performance and has won a lot of plaudits at Preston.
The under-18s wrapped up their season. They finished third in the under-18 Premier League North. They had back-to-back draws home and away to Everton and a thrilling victory at Sunderland, 4-3 that was. Some good performances, a lot more of the under-16s as kind of always happens at the end of the season, and particularly these last couple of seasons, the schedule, because of weather problems and various other scheduling things, the schedule at the end of the season has been mad. Not quite as mad as last season when United under-18s played 2 games in 2 days, but still pretty mad. And so you get a lot of the under-16s who are going to play next season, getting their first opportunities. Shea Lacey's been involved kind of all of the season and just turned 16. He does look brilliant. He's a properly good player who resembles kind of Phil Foden, that kind of diminutive, low centre of gravity, left-footed player. Yeah, he looks great, but there's some other under-16s who have done very well. And yeah, it's been quite a good season for the 18s. It was disappointment in the FA Youth Cup, but the performances have slowly got better and there's some young players looking great. The other 16-year-old to do pretty well recently was Jaden Camerson, who's come from right back and he scored against Everton. So yeah, good end to the season for them. The 21s wrapped up their season with 2 draws as well, 2-2 at home to Spurs and the same scoreline at home to Leicester. Contrasting performances, one good, one slightly less good. It's been an okay season for them as well. They ended up finishing 9th in Premier League 2. Obviously a very young team with a lot of players out on loan, players like Garnacho in the first team setup as well. So they've handled with that well, some good experiences and some positive players coming through. We'll talk about them more at the end of the season when we do kind of a full season review. But for now, let's preview United's next game away at Bournemouth, back on the road. It could be, it's not been good recently. Are you more confident for this one?
Yeah, because Bournemouth have managed to kind of extricate themselves from the relegation fight, don't have too much on the line towards the end of the season and are just a team that I think are sort of there for the taking for United. But having said that, again, we are playing away from home. I think it's one of those games where United... If
Chelsea can win at Bournemouth, then anyone can.
This is true. This is true. I mean, Chelsea did just draw with Nottingham Forest, who haven't won an away game in what feels like 5 years.
And they lost 4-0 to West Ham at home as well.
Yeah. A month ago, this game looked like it was going to be much more difficult than I think it will end up, because we thought Bournemouth were going to be in the middle of a really, really tight relegation scrap. I think they're mathematically safe now, or if they're not mathematically safe, they're very close to it. So I think that will help a lot. They have much less on the line. But they have been playing better football in the last month or so, hence why they're out of the relegation fight. But I mean, I would expect United to go there. I think if we can score a first half goal, I think it could end up being pretty comfortable. I think if you go in at halftime 0-0 or behind, I think we could really struggle.
Yeah, I think they are mathematically safe now. 14th, 39 points, and mathematically safe. So we should be. We've just spoken about the teams who have beaten them at home. And we should absolutely be winning this. But the first goal, as we've spoken about earlier, seems to be crucial with United, and our finishing needs to be better. And then we go into the final 2 games of the season against Chelsea and Fulham, and hopefully get top 4 wrapped up.
And weirdly, despite how down everything has felt over the last month or so, third is still very much in play. Newcastle have only got 1 point from the last 2 games. Yeah. We're level on points with them. Win your last 3 and see if Newcastle drop any points.
They've got Brighton, Leicester and Chelsea. So Brighton at home is a difficult game. Although Brighton seems to be kind of going on this topsy-turvy form where they have one good, one bad at the moment.
Yeah, they're beating Arsenal as we record.
Yeah, having lost 5-1 to Everton. They beat Wolves 6-0, having lost away at Forest. Yeah, it's a strange... They've had some strange results. So if they beat Arsenal today, you would then expect them to then lose to Newcastle, which would be no good for us. But third is absolutely... Imagine third. Think how happy we'll be if it's third, an FA Cup and the League Cup in a season. What a brilliant year that would be.
There's so much jeopardy at the end of this season, because you're right, third, FA Cup, League Cup, amazing. 2 days ago, I think we would have all been feeling like fifth and just a League Cup was more likely. Yeah.
Well, I don't think the FA Cup is likely at all. City are ridiculous. That Gundogan goal that he scored earlier was just outrageous, but just got to hope that the Real Madrid do the job.
His second one wasn't bad either.
Yeah. He's a silly player. City are doing what they do and just kind of rolling towards the title. Yeah, as they've done too often recently. Let's not end on a City note. It was a great weekend for United men, a disappointing one for United women, but the sight of an 18-year-old scoring late on in front of the Stretford end is pretty special, no matter how many times he's done it recently. So we'll end on that positive note. For our thoughts throughout the week, you can find Jack on Twitter at
UTD Tate, TAIT.
You can find me at Harry Robinson64 and the podcast itself at UTD Weekly Pod, where you can find information about how to become a patron for as little as £1.50 a month and get ad-free early release episodes with bonus Q&As slap bang in the middle of them. If you want to support the show in any other way, just share it with your mates. That'll do for us and would be massively appreciated. But thank you very much for listening, giving us your time. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll speak to you next week. Goodbye.
Social Podcast Network.